Towson ball season. They're doing it all around the country this week. And for those of you watching on our Facebook Live or on our YouTube WNSTV channel, you'll see that I am wearing one of my favorite hats. It's my Los Angeles Dodgers visor, and I'm doing that out of deference to my next guest. She's not only one of my favorite architects, she's one of my favorite people. She is Jana Marie Smith. She's now a special executive with the Dodgers, but at one point, she built a little ballpark that we're still enjoying here, and 25 years later, Jana Marie Smith, you're not even 25 years old. How's this ballpark 25? It really is amazing that on opening day, I thought about this, April 3rd, that was the day that I first walked in the Camden Yards with John Stedman. The stadium was just trying to get finished, and you opened it to the media on the Friday before opening day, and there were hundreds of media people there, and it feels like about a week and a half ago, right?
Now I want to know, what did John Stedman have to say about it that day?
You know what? John and I walked all over the concourse together, and I just thought I ran into him because the media met behind home plate, and where the elevators are, and we walked in that way. And John and I went up to the club level, and we walked down to right field because we wanted to see what the seats look like, and we wound up in the club level. Right field down where the brick wall is, and we realized we weren't really in the ballpark anymore, that you actually created seats that weren't really in the bowl and I was like, man, this stadium's big, it's got some weird edges and some weird angles, and I know people complained about the seats down in left field facing center field and not facing home plate, but I think we both realized it was like the most beautiful place we'd ever seen. I think For a kid from Dundalk that took the 22 bus, from Highlandtown out there to the old ballpark, I couldn't believe it was kind of here to stay, right? I mean, it felt very like, well, this is too nice for Baltimore. I really did sort of feel like this is too clean. It's too new. I can't believe it's – do we get to keep it? It was like kind of one of those feelings, I think.
Well, remember, John had – advocated tearing down the warehouse.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
And it largely because he was a proponent of the water views, and I think those of us who are working on the project, led by HOK, the architects that the Stadium Authority had brought in to design Camden Yards, realized that the only place you'd get a view of the water would have been straight down Conway Street. So obviously, we opted to keep the warehouse.
Well, he loved Port Covington, as I remember, right?
I don't know.
He loved Port Covington. He thought the team should be at Port Covington because of the freeway access. And I think it took a lot of people of that era a lot to think about a literal downtown harbor ballpark. That concept was not universal at all. Matter of fact, a lot of people thought it could be in Columbia, right? That would share the Washington market. There was part of that going on as well.
Well, you're absolutely right about that, and that's the real tribute to Camden Yards sitting here 25 years later, is that it proved that sports and cities were a good marriage. And when William Donald Schaefer sort of famously advocated for downtown, I remember this Price Waterhouse study, proposing several different sites, and William Donald Schaefer said, well, I don't care what it says, as long as it says it's going downtown. It's good with me. And, he just so believed in Baltimore. But, of course, you look at what he'd done in Baltimore with the aquarium, the Science Center, the Inner Harbor, the Convention Center.
The city's really about him, isn't it? I mean, like, I passed that statue. It's right across the street from where I live at the harbor, Jana Marie. You know that. And, I see that, and I think to myself, what a shame that people don't really know enough about his contributions in that way, that maybe the long tail of his legend isn't as long as it should be on the 25th anniversary. So I'm glad you brought him up.
Well, he was a really important part of it. And of course, Larry Lucchino, the president of the Orioles, had this passion about it being baseball only. He could see that the end of the multi-purpose stadium era was in sight, and didn't see any reason why Maryland should be building a multi-purpose park, especially when our football team had already left. And, once he had convinced the state legislature to do baseball only, then the natural next step was this old-fashioned ballpark with modern amenities. Well, I shouldn't say natural next step in his mind, but he was maybe the only one thinking about that. I mean, I don't like to use the visionary word a lot because it gets tossed around so haphazardly, but that was truly a visionary idea that he had. But it wouldn't have been real without Schaefer's commitment to downtown.
Janet Marie Smith joining us here. You can follow her out on Twitter at Smith Janet Marie. She is one of our favorite people and now working for the Los Angeles Dodgers after, of course, rebuilding the Fenway Park Green Monster seats, but was first in and first up. And still, Janet Marie, I must say you are a Baltimorean at this point, not by birth from Mississippi. Thank God for that. But you make this your home, right? I mean, this is
Yes,
Baltimore's home for you.
Still home, absolutely. And it's just a treat to still be a season ticket holder at Camden Yards and be able to enjoy that park 25 years later with no responsibilities for it. Just enjoy it.
Well, I want to ask about all of this because I was out in Phoenix last week, and first off, I saw Sloan Park out there. I know what an architecture nerd you are, and even for the smaller ballparks, and of course, you had a huge hand in helping Peter Angelos figure out Sarasota down there. So anybody that's been to Sarasota and has sat at the porches out there and under the umbrellas, that's all Janet Marie's work, by the way. But I saw the new ballparks out in Arizona. It's unbelievable. From Talking Stick to Sloan Park and all of that stuff. But during my trip, the NFL moved another team, and out of Oakland, and I was a part of that, and the sort of seeing how the sausage is made, and at the Goodell press conference and all that. And we're seeing cities still lose teams over facilities, over stadia, and I think maybe we forget at this point, certainly the younger generation that doesn't even know how hard we had to claw to get the football team to even have a football team here. What a miracle it is! But what a miracle it is to have Camden Yards ever get built. And how Larry and AEBW and the state and the city and the money and the financing and the lotteries and it's very complicated building a stadium. I mean, it's not we're just going to tax the people and pass it along. There's a million things that go into this, and I know you were privy to a lot of that as it was formatively coming together, but even your concept of building an old-fashioned ballpark was poo-pooed by some people because out in Chicago, they were opening a new version of an old Yankee Stadium, right? I mean, they were building a stadium. You and Larry were insistent that it would be a ballpark, right?
Well, that was really Larry. I had the good fortune of carrying out his mandate, but that was something that he just felt so strongly about, and it happened at a time when attitudes about planning and urban design were changing in America from being more tower in the park like as architects like to think of it in the 60s to a much more contextual attitude about urbanism, and so all of those things fit together. It was a good idea. I don't know what else to say. It was a good idea, and it felt right for Baltimore because Baltimore had already set itself apart, as I mentioned a moment ago, by building this collection of attractions downtown that would give people another reason to come downtown. And I think that Larry's whole idea of making this a sustainable baseball park was driven by the fact that he constantly pointed out to anyone who would listen that Wrigley Field and Fenway Park were the two smallest parks in the major leagues, but consistently, regardless of how the team played, had the highest attendance in all of the major leagues. And so he saw in that longevity, and that's what we were searching for. And you ask about the 25 years. One of the hardest questions that I can remember trying to answer when we go around to community groups and they'd say, well, how do we know this is going to stand the test of time? Why would you spend new money to build an old ballpark? Memorial Stadium is only 35 years old. How do we know this is going to last any longer? Well, you didn't. You really didn't. And so Larry's goal was to build this nice little ballpark for Baltimore, but one that was going to stand the test of time and would be able to draw 2-3 million people a year. So, by that measure, certainly Baltimore led the pack, and in what's happened in the last 25 years with, cities all across the country from Pittsburgh to San Diego to Cleveland, moving their parks into the center city and saying, we're going to make this part of our redevelopment.
It is interesting. I mean, you mentioned downtown ballparks, but I mean, San Francisco, Boston was built that way. Chicago sort of built that way, but Atlanta is an outlier. And I know you're a Southern person by birth, and I know that you saw the Olympic Park become Turner Field. Then they ripped down the Fulton County there, but to move from an urban center out to the suburbs and then build sort of an avenue around that. Atlanta's done it sort of in a backwards way, and I mean, I wouldn't say they're opening this week. They're not opening till next week. But Janet Marie, all the great ideas you had, how could you not come up with the idea to put the coolers right there inside of the table to keep the beer cold? I mean, how did we put a man on the moon in 1969? How's it 2017 we're coming up with this concept, Janet Marie?
Yeah, I know. I think that's crazy. And the cup holders that are supposed to keep your beer cold right there in your seat. I'm going to check that out myself.
I got to get me one of those. But, moving out of the city, that's a new concept. Someone floated that idea after the riots here, and, that the next stadium for the Orioles wouldn't be downtown, that it would be out where the people are. I don't know, as a Baltimorean, as a guy that pays taxes, I don't understand that concept at all. But clearly in Atlanta, that was sold, right?
Well, I can't comment on the Atlanta situation. I just don't think I know enough about it to add anything intelligent to it. I think the Braves felt that they didn't have any input or control over their surroundings at Turner Field, and what they were offered in Cobb County gave them total control and an opportunity to do a development that would give them the energy around the park that they sought after.
But the development part now is not just the stadium, right? I mean, when you built Camden Yards, it was Camden Yards and the warehouse, but now it's what's the city around that ballpark going to look like, and that's in Foxborough where they've built a mall and movie theaters and bowling alleys, and that's the new model. That's what the NFL is going to do in LA. That's what they're going to do in Vegas, right?
Yeah, that is the model, and I think what you're touching on is that today teams are looking to control the entirety of it. And I think what was different when Camden Yards opened in '92 was that the state had funded Camden Yards with a goal of igniting development. And there's a little bit of irony in Baltimore to that, because I would argue that it did a better job of redefining downtown than it did actually igniting development, in a way because at the hands of the same government entities, the neighboring sites around Camden Yards were held off of the private market in order to be the expansion for the convention center, the home to the new convention center hotel. So the same opportunity to have that kind of organic neighborhood, bars and pubs and retail that you see in Chicago or Boston doesn't exist in the same way in Baltimore, which isn't to say that we shouldn't continue to strive for that kind of excitement. And I think some of the nicest things that have happened to Camden Yards since it's opened, aside from the TLC that's happened inside, and I do think the Maryland Stadium Authority and Peter Angelos have done a great job of taking care of it. But I love the fact that, we've got the Zenith residences and that Pratt Street's retail, and some of those things have really come alive and started to make it feel much more urban.
She is Janet Marie Smith. She's Smith Janet Marie out on Twitter. If you want to reach her, she's with the Los Angeles Dodger Stadium. That's, as you know, that's my favorite place. But that's a different kind of thing you did there, which was revitalize something that was already there and old and historic and not going anywhere. But no one walks into Dodger Stadium and thinks, "Oh, this place looks 60 years old," right?
It is, though, pretty close. It's the third oldest in baseball now, right after Wrigley and Fenway, and it's been around since 1962. And our job in renovating that has been to figure out how to celebrate this mid-century modern architecture, these sort of crazy pastel colors, and this idea that Dodger owner Walter O'Malley had when he moved from Brooklyn to L.A. of carving the stadium into the hillside of Chavez Ravine so that every level you enter at grade, there's no stairs and escalators to wander up and down. You just walk into your seat and there you are, whether you're on the top deck or whether you're on the field level. and it's just so different from any other park. It's enormous, 56,000 seats. It's huge, but in LA they fill them up. I think that's the biggest difference. It's a community that can manage to do that. So while Dodger Stadium lacks the intimacy of some of the other ballparks, it arguably has the best views in all of baseball because it was designed solely with that in mind.
Yeah, it's my favorite place, and man, we're off to a new season, right, Janet Marie? Right? It's baseball again, 25 years later. Last thing for you on building Camden. When did this come to you? I mean, you were a young lady at that point, and they were taking a chance, and it's not like you had built 10 other ballparks or had done this in a million other places. How did you become connected? Were you naturally
Larry,
a baseball fan?
Yeah, baseball fan and a city fan, and the two came together in this project. And I always have known that Larry Lucchino hired me largely because I didn't come from sports. He did not want, as he put it, Kansas City with bricks on it. He had a vision for what he wanted, and when I went to work for him, he said, "I know exactly what it is, but I won't know it until it's built, and then it's too late." All of these drawings and the models and things that architects produce are so seductive when they're sitting here on your desk at the miniature size, but how do you know what it's going to really feel like? How do you know it's going to have the kind of intimacy, asymmetry that he had loved at Forbes Field growing up in Pittsburgh, and that he had witnessed in his travels around other parks, and he really wanted that for Baltimore. And he was delighted to have an architect as experienced as HOK and impressed with what they'd done with the little pilot field in Buffalo. But I mean, he really wanted this to be different. So when I went out, knocking on his door, trying to persuade him to hire me to manage the project for his perspective, I think he saw, the fact that I hadn't worked in sports, but that I did have a lot of urban design experience working in cities and working with, public entities as well as private entities on these partnerships, that it could be a good fit. And of course, I've had the opportunity to work for Larry Lucchino twice now, so hopefully he still feels that way, because I loved working for him in Boston on the renovation of Fenway as well.
Is there anything about Camden Yards that almost happened, that didn't happen, that you fought for, fought against, talked them into, talked them out of? I love those kind of stories, and one of the reasons I even ask you that is out at the radio station, I have a picture that was one of the HOK rejects. Like it was a mock-up. I think I got it from Sports Legends or Babe Ruth or whatever, but it's a version of Camden Yards that isn't what it turned out to be. It's similar, it's like a cousin, but it was obviously one of the drawings, one of the early renderings where some things were changed. But is there anything that really kind of did move or not move the project? I know the warehouse itself was a little bit under scrutiny, right? I mean, there were people saying to not have that, right?
Well, probably the rendering you have is, there's one early version that shows the warehouse cut in half, so that only the portion that was acting as a home to the Orioles remained. And we were real advocates of keeping the whole thing, because what made the warehouse important wasn't its architectural style per se, but the fact that you had this crazy 1,000-foot long, 50-foot wide building. It was really its urban form that made it interesting. And you ask about what did and didn't happen. It's interesting, the things that did and didn't happen all are sort of related to the warehouse. Thank goodness we kept the whole thing. Thank goodness that Herb Belgrad, as chairman of the Stadium Authority, required that we do a financial analysis and prove to ourselves that keeping the warehouse was going to be cheaper than building all that square footage in the new stadium. So it turned out to be an economical move as well as an architectural one. And then later, after the warehouse not only was saved, but it was determined that the whole thing was going to be kept, and the Stadium Authority would lease out the southern half of it as office space, which adds to their vanity of Camden Yards to have more people there working every day. Then there was a move at one point to enlarge the warehouse and to and to add square footage to it for a federal agency, or I guess a state agency. And the Orioles fought it vigorously because we wanted the warehouse to stay pure in form. And I've always attributed its demise, happily, to Ed Gunt's story in the Baltimore Sun, where the headline blared, "A pimple on the warehouse." And Governor Schaefer kind of looked at this project fresh when he saw that headline. He said, "We're not putting a pimple on the warehouse." So I was glad that didn't happen.
I knew Ed Guntz. His desk was 2 down from mine at the Sun, so I'm familiar with his
Oh my gosh! Well, he still writes just great stuff about Baltimore. It's
Mad
so fun
Professor Ed Guntz, right there, right?
Yes. And then you say, well, what did happen that you wish hadn't happened? Sometimes I'm a little wistful for the building that used to connect Camden Station to the Camden warehouse. It was part of the whole B&O complex, and so I guess it had a B&O name too. And while I think the ticket offices and the retired number plaza, it certainly gives fans a lot of room to mill around, and is welcome in that regard. Architecturally, it was arguably the more significant of the buildings. And sometimes I wonder if we had been a little, what we did was bold enough for its time, I suppose. But I think had a touch more confidence, we might have saved that one too.
She is Janet Marie Smith. She works for the Dodgers. She helped build Camden Yards 25 years ago this week. We're marking time. Jan, it's always great having you on because I learn things.
Me too.
And it's not just
the John Sidma story.
Yeah, when I run into you on airplanes and trains and planes and automobiles and all that stuff. But we'll make our way out the Chavez Ravine before it's all over with. Good luck to your Dodgers. I am wearing the hat right now, and we'll check in again in another 25 years and see how we're doing. Okay.
I hope it's before then, but thank you.
One of my all-time favorites, certainly my favorite architect, if not person, Janet Marie Smith, who's been very, very kind to my wife and I during her battle and my baseball tour, my 30-30 a couple of years ago. No one kinder and better and more talented than Janet Marie Smith. Go to Dodger Stadium. Go sit on the wall up at Fenway Park. Go to Sarasota. Come to Camden Yards. You can't do any of those things without at least a little bit of her in your soul or a little bit of her in your beer because she put them all together for you. So there you have it. Janet Marie Smith. She is Smith Janet Marie out on Twitter. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And last but never least, breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here on Thursday, getting you home and getting you ready for the weekend and the Masters and anything else that's happening out in the world. You know, I'm getting ready for the Caps and the Wizards, and we got Oriole baseball now every other night this week, but every night after that, Liars Luncheon, the draft a couple of weeks out in Philadelphia. Plenty of things to discuss around here. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.